Alright, so let's move on to chapter number 2, which is everything to do with quadratics. In this video series, we're going to be looking at how to solve these questions. We're going to look at completing the square, sketching these graphs, and also applying them to real-life models. This last part, applying them to real-life models, is actually a very common question which does come up in exam papers. Anyway, so what is a quadratic equation? You guys have probably seen a lot of these before. It's just basically when we have an x squared term. So the general form would be ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, c are just numbers. You can see all these different types of quadratic equations popping up around me. They're just all quadratics, but just in different forms. Anyway, if I equate this equal to 0, essentially what we're trying to do is trying to find the x values which satisfy the solution. And there are actually 3 different ways of doing it. So the easiest way is by factorizing, which we've learned in chapter 1, or we can do the quadratic formula, or we can solve it by completing the square. Before applying these 3 methods, you have to always make sure that all the terms are onto one side. So if you have terms on either side of the equal sign, just make sure you shift them all over to one side and make sure it's equal to 0, and then go ahead and try and solve it. Right, so let's look at this equation here. As you can see, we have terms on either side of the equal signs. I'm going to shift them all to one side, giving me minus 6x squared plus x plus 7 is 0. So I'm going to change the signs around to get 6x squared minus x minus 7 is 0. And the first method I said was we can factorize it. So if I do factorize it, I get brackets 6x minus 7 and another bracket x plus 1 is equal to 0. Because we're multiplying both brackets, it means that each term or each bracket is equivalent to 0 or can be equivalent to 0. So I just make each one equal to 0 and solve for x, giving me the x is 7 over 6 or negative 1. Those are the 2 solutions. Let's try another one. So let's try this equation here. We have x squared minus 4x plus 4 is 0. I can factorize this to get x minus 2 all squared is equal to 0, making the bracket equal to 0 and solving for x, x is equal to 2. You can see here actually we only get one solution, whereas the previous example we got 2 solutions, right? So in most cases we do get 2 solutions, but there are some cases which we get 1 solution, and even other cases which are rare where we get no solutions whatsoever. All these different scenarios we'll look at in more detail in a later video in this series. Right, so if factorizing does not work, then what we have to do is use the quadratic formula or complete the square. I think you guys have seen the quadratic formula before. You can see this equation pop up. We have the minus b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Now these a, b, c values are just the coefficients of the general form for a quadratic. So a is a coefficient of x squared, b is a coefficient of x, and c is just a number. If you identify each one, it's just a matter of just simply plugging them into the formula. So looking at this equation here, this equation does not factorize, so we need to use the quadratic formula. A is going to be 3, b is going to be this 10 here, and c is going to be a negative 2, which I just plug into the formula. If I do simplify it, I get x is equal to minus 10 plus or minus, remember this plus or minus, the square root of 124 over 6, so which I simplify, I'll get minus 5 plus or minus square root of 31 over 3. So one solution will be when x is minus 5 plus root 31 over 3, and the other one will be minus 5 minus root 31 over 3. So you can see, even though we can't factorize it, we can still find the solutions by using the quadratic formula. The last method is completing the square, which I will look at, or we'll look at in more detail in the next video. As I said before, this kind of trying to find a solution, I think you guys have learned before in GCSEs, and it should be just a recap for you guys. But if not, then maybe just practice some of the questions I've listed out after the video, and just use that as practice and then move on if you do manage to get all the answers.